Good evening, everyone. Welcome. It is a pleasure to have you all here. For us, has been months and months in the making. This is the first in a four-part series this fall, and so if you're not aware and you haven't looked through the bulletins that were in the back yet, this is the first in a four-part series on the future of life and faith. This evening, I'll introduce right now our interviewer, Christopher Lydon, host of Open Source on WBUR, credited with the very first podcast, which is one of my favorite things. It's kind of a picture of forward-thinkingness, I think.
Desperation.
He will be interviewing and hosting all of the events to come. And tonight we have the pleasure of the Reverend Nancy Taylor from Old South Church. I guess soon leaving Old South Church, but a wonderful career there. Has been the head of the United Church of Christ of Massachusetts, and also has an incredibly distinguished career in the ministry. And so Reverend Leach, myself, the members and the officers of the Boston Society of the New Jerusalem, would like to welcome you all, the audience in the room, as well as the audience online, to hopefully get some insight into what the future is in this post-pandemic world. These are certainly questions that we have, and it's an honor to be able to maybe share some of these questions and some of these answers with everyone. So without further delay, please welcome, and we look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm very excited about this whole evening. The whole religious subject is of immense interest to me. And I'm delighted to be talking with Nancy Taylor. We're talking, among other things, the monster big picture is faith and life, and the specific subject is really the future of the, what do we call it, the established church, or the mainline Protestant churches. We know the trend has been down in membership and in sort of notoriety, participation in the general conversation, I think. But Nancy's church and Nancy are exceptional. I thought it'd be fun, Nancy, if you just begin by brag a little bit about your success at Old South. Not to be confused with the Old South Meeting House on the bottom of School Street, but right there, opposite the library in Copley Square. How have you beaten the odds? And then I'll introduce myself a little bit. But your history, oddly enough, we had at least one, no, I didn't go to divinity school, much less the Yale Divinity School, but we know that ground. Roland Bateman, for example, we didn't speak of that, but, and I did a lot of religious stuff as an undergraduate. But introduce yourself and the short form, and we'll get to expand it, of why Old South has remained an incredibly vital place.
Thank you, Chris.
Pleasure.
And thank you all for coming to think a little bit and talk a little bit about the state of the church. My authority for that, I guess, is 40 years in ministry, most of them as a pastor of a church. I did a 3.5-year stint as an adjudicatory executive as the minister and president of Massachusetts Conference, United Church of Christ. But other than that, I've served churches, little churches in rural Maine. I had 3 little churches. My first church is out of seminary. Then I served as an associate in a urban multicultural church in Hartford, Connecticut. Then I like to say the Holy Spirit blew me out to Boise, Idaho, where I served among the potatoes, the cowboys, and the Mormons. And then a gig in Massachusetts as conference minister, and then I've been at Old South Church in Boston for 17 years. And the Old South Meeting House, of which you refer, was our second home, which is now a museum on the Freedom Trail. Old South Church in Boston, we have some members here, and we just crossed our 352nd year, or we're in our 353rd year right now. And when you're that old, you have a lot to atone for, so that we have history that we've been studying and unearthing that we need to reckon with. I think our success in recent years, when I arrived in 2005, we had one service once a week, formal, robes, a big organ, processional, the big pulpit, and the minister's miles away. And we introduced new services in our chapel, our stone chapel, which does not have fixed pews. And so we were able to subvert that Gothic chapel and do worship in the round. We introduced communion at every service. We brought in a jazz band and changed the music up from our basically white European, hymnal kind of stuff. Added candle stations everywhere and interactive worship. Tonight they're doing a labyrinth. Last week we wrote on paper that you then put in fire and you get to get rid of your sins that way. We try to make it interactive, participatory. I think that one of our successes has been bringing in young clergy and seminarians. That's been a big part of our success. Is they bring fresh ideas and they come and go, maybe faster than you'd like. But between our seminarians, we have one or two every year, and our young associate ministers, they've brought a lot of youthfulness, a lot of forward thinking, a lot of technologies to us. And when people come to visit and they see somebody young up there in the pulpit and on the chancel and leading worship, they're more likely to stay. So I think that's been a part of it. I think our preaching, we try for it to be not only fresh and relevant, but also optimistic and full of hope, positive. We teach and worship and know a God who is more mercy than judgment. And we are people for whom the cup of hope is always at least half full. And that's a part of what's inside of us when we come before our Maker. We understand worship to be the center and heart of our life together as a worshiping community. And from everything else flows from our worship life, from who we meet, who we encounter in the living God, and who we know in the stories of Jesus. So that's our center, that's the heart of our life, and out from there we go into the world to serve and hopefully to bear witness to the hope that is in us.
It sounds wonderful. I want to be there, and I've never been to your service at Old South, but it sounds like you've got a little bit of the Catholic thing. You've got candles, and you've also got jazz from the Black Church, and that's a lot to start with. If I can just introduce my own sort of faith story, and we've got to talk about faith and what the gospel and what Jesus has to do with all of this. But I said to Nancy last night, I am a Black Baptist Irish Catholic, or maybe really an Irish Catholic Black Baptist. I've been baptized twice. First time when I was probably less than a week old, by Cardinal Cushing at the Sacred Heart Church in Newton Center, Massachusetts. And my mother says that when we were little kids, and Cardinal Cushing was a tremendous booming talker. I may be the only one who really remembers Cardinal Cushing late in life. He was sort of the Kennedy bishop and archbishop and cardinal at the inauguration, but he was also an incredibly folksy character, and he talked very loud. And my mother says I would say to her, sort of, Mom, does he have to talk that loud? In any event, then I went to the Sacred Heart School. My parents were both serious Catholics, but on the liberal progressive side. And short form, I dropped out of Catholicism as an undergraduate and found my way back, 25 years later, in the 12th Baptist Church in Boston, and I was baptized by full immersion that time, not just a sprinkle. And this time it took. I mean, it made me a Christian for the first time, or convinced me I'm a Christian. And we could talk all night about individual church experiences, but the 12th Baptist Church was an incredibly important thing in my life, as important as my college education, almost my parents. Presided over by Michael Haynes. Does anybody know the 12th Baptist Church? Does anybody? Praise God. And you were touched by Michael Haynes too? Amen, thank you. I was saying to Nancy, this is sort of a joke, but I can recognize 12th Baptist people from, 100 feet away, easy, 100 yards almost. But there was an energy in that church, and I look back on it now after the death of Michael Haynes 2 or 3 years ago. It was a kind of miracle. It was a perfect, people say, we're not a perfect church, but we serve a perfect God. This was damn near, forgive me, a perfect church. It had unbelievable energy. I was one of the few white people in it, but it was a completely welcoming space for me. It was devout, definitely touched by Jesus, and faith, although we got to talk about what faith is, and black in many wonderful cultural ways, but it was completely unprovincial and open. And Reverend Haynes used to say his favorite church in the world was, and now I can't remember, John Stott was the preacher in London, a church of all saints and sinners, 2,500 people in it. But that was Haynes's idea of a not sophisticated, but passionate world church. Anyway, what can I say? We'll get to this question of faith. Maybe I could ask it of you just to get started, Nancy. We're talking about faith and life, but I have my own notion of what faith is, and the Black Baptist Church sort of leaves a lot of it up to you. But what is it at Old South? Do you recite a creed, for example, in your service?
We are, depending on who you speak to, either a non-creedal or a many-creedal church. We can be promiscuous with our creeds. We're not creedal, though. We have an affirmation of faith, which is different than a test of faith. A creed is a test of faith. So, but what we gather around is, first of all, is the stories, the ancient stories of our ancestors who met and experienced a gracious and present God, and we stand on their shoulders and come to gather in the presence of that same God, trusting that which we cannot see or touch, trusting that there is more to this life than meets the eye, trusting that there is a creative impulse at the heart of the universe that is benevolent. Trusting that if your circumstances are dire, there is a presence and a being whose heart is love, who is in your corner and has your back. St. Paul said, faith is trusting what you cannot know. I can't prove to you, don't try to prove to anybody what it is that I believe. I can't.
St. Paul said this.
Yeah, I can't.
You got to point me to that.
I can't show you heaven, but I live as if heaven is around the corner, right?
You speak it beautifully, Nancy. I'm very touched by your language, and it's very, I would say, Haynesian, although
I'm very honored.
He might be a little bit more emphatic about how we know it and how much we know it. It's funny. I'm not a regular at 12th Baptist Church anymore since Reverend Haynes' death, but one of the things I miss most, and you'll know that the hymn that we used to sing, I don't know, a couple of times a year maybe, but it was basically Jesus on the main line. Tell him what you want. Call him up. Line's never busy, all that kind of thing. And it was said with tremendous conviction and celebration that God is there. From my own perspective, in that situation, though, I think so much people waste so much time around losing their faith, defining their faith, getting very particular about you must believe this or you'll fry in hell. You must believe the unbelievable, the unprovable, the mysterious, the profoundly mysterious. Doing radio and many, many shows on music, I came to think, when people tell you about their music that they feel passionately about, they're telling you about their religion. They're telling you about how accessible, how moved, how interested they are in something that they can't touch, they can't identify, they can't spell out, they can't prove. But religious faith is like that. And to me, we'll have to talk about a little bit about the neo-atheism and the passion that people put into denying religion or faith. But to me, faith is, another thing about Reverend Haynes and 12th Baptist, he never, ever asked you to believe what you couldn't believe, or asked you to believe because he said so, or believe what you couldn't understand. He never insulted either your intelligence or your freedom. But in that context, and you said it, you spelled it out wonderfully, you have a friend. There is a purpose. And in the end, it's true. And we know it's true. Over to you. Where do you want to take that business of faith, which to me is very interesting?
The American sociologist studied religion, Peter Berger, stated in, I'm trying to remember what year, 1965 or something like that, that religion was going to be gone. You know, we're secular world, we're growing out of our need for this primitive expression, this belief in another world and another being. Berger did take that back. What I would say today is that...
Peter Berger is still with us, is he not? Or is he?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
But he did recant that statement. You know, religion has been predicted to be in decline. It's actually increased around the world. It may be somewhat in decline in the United States, but it really depends on where you are. I think what I would argue is that as long as people are going to die, as long as there's more to this world than we understand, as long as there's beauty and hope, there's going to be people who want to connect to that higher power, that sense, that source of life and faith. Religion is proliferating right now, but in all kinds of different ways. So some of the religions, Colin, that were in ascendancy in these United States, you know, as not a Christian nation when it was founded, are in radical decline, but other traditions are rising up, that we have, you know, enter pluralism. And so I am not as concerned as some are about the precipitous decline in mainline Christianity, in Roman Catholicism. I think that there's a lot of downsizing and resizing happening right now, and that those who can make religion matter, make it important. You know, Burn Stanfield is here, Fourth Pres Church, the place is hopping. Good leadership, and you give people something to gather around, give them, you know, real meat, religious soul food to eat, and they will gather and be there. So I think a lot of the decline is resizing. Resizing and downsizing. We're not a Christian nation. You know, sure, there's the permission now to be secular, to be an atheist, to be a druid, to be, you know, there's all kinds of ways that people are expressing and uncovering and discovering the divine, and connecting with that which is deep and high and holy. And I think there'll be places like Old South Church, I think there'll be places like Fourth Pres, where people arrive and there's a palpable sense of the Spirit. People find joy in each other's company,
Yep.
find meaning in the work that we are doing. with one another. We have stories. Our stories of the faith are so beautiful. They're so beautiful. You know, I think about
what kind of stories are you talking about?
the stories that Jesus told, the parables, his healing stories, his miracle stories.
Amen.
The stories of God, hearing the agony and the pain of the Hebrews suffering under slavery and responding to that. God saying to Moses, "Go to head of state and tell him to let my people go." That's a great story, right?
No, it's incredible.
These are stories where God is invading our world when things get so awry that they need to be corrected a bit. We live as if that's still happening, and we're a part of it, and it's a beautiful thing to be a part of.
Let's talk about anti-religion. I find it almost comical and deeply mysterious why people are so eager to tell you that there's no meaning, that this just happened. To me, there's so many delights, and you've listed a lot of them, in church, of meeting other people. I remember Haynes used to have this thing he would do once a month. I don't know, maybe you do something like it. He didn't invent it, but he would say, okay, on your feet and turn to somebody next to you, not your husband, not your wife, not your child, but say hello and basically ask, what can I pray for in your life? And we will hold hands and look at each other like grown-ups and say, what can I, and there's a woman from Barbados whose family was half there, half here. She was in difficulty about it. And it was just one of the most liberating, happy moments. And I forget what I laid on her, but it was sort of, I worked too hard, or whatever, or I'm in a tangle with my wife or something, but to be able to have a license to share something like that. But in any event, there's an energy. I think of the rather famous psychologist at Harvard, Steve Pinker, who's maybe the closest person I know, who is just death on religion. I mean, superstition, all that spooky stuff. And I'm thinking, what is his problem? Where is the objection? I also always think people who condemn or ban one God invariably adopt another one.
Yeah, I will, religion has not always presented itself beautifully in the world. Religion is a powerful, potent force. It's as potent as the knife in a surgeon's hand. It can do good and it can do ill. And there's been a lot of ill done in the name of religion and in the name of God. And
true,
so
absolutely.
I think I understand and have some sympathy for some of those folks. But for me, religion is, if you think about the Sistine Chapel ceiling and the painting by Michelangelo called The Creation of Adam. And there's, God is reaching down and Adam is reaching up. And that space between Adam's hand and God's hand, that's where the church does its work, right? That's in the space between heaven and earth, time and eternity, good and evil, spirit and flesh. That's where we, you look about all these buildings out around here, and then occasionally there's a church that's aimed somewhere different. We don't sell a product. People come in these doors. They don't give you money and walk out with a pair of shoes. But, I think a minor miracle at a place like Old South, and I know Fourth Pres, is that people are generous with their money to make the church happen, because despite the fact they're not getting a pair of shoes for their money, something that tangible, there's something happening that's so meaningful there that they want to support it. They want to be paying for music. You talked about music and spirituality. Look at those in the life of the church. Most of us cannot do religion, cannot praise without music in our bodies and in our mouths and our hymns. We speak theology when we're singing hymns, and that is connecting with a deep, deep, deep part of ourselves that all those other places out there don't do that well at. And I think that's where church does have something to offer that no one else really does.
True, and it also I'm fascinated by people who don't think of themselves as religious, and suddenly they will burst out with something that is absolutely religious in its foundation. One small example, but there was a wonderful man in Cambridge, Charlie Davidson. Maybe people know Charlie Davidson, that doesn't really matter. Armenian man, not religious, a tailor to all sorts of people, including Miles Davis, including me, including all sorts of people. But I had disappointed him. He had asked me to come show up at a gathering like this or whatever it was, but it meant something to him, and I let him down, and it bothered me terribly. I couldn't go in to see him until, maybe a month later, and I finally crawled in and said, Charlie, I'm just so sorry that I was not there when you wanted me. And he interrupted me. He had a laryngectomy, and his voice was very distinctive, but he said, Chris, you have to understand one thing. I said, what's that, Charlie? He said, you can do no wrong in my eyes. And I thought, holy moly, that is, to me, that's almost our Christian belief in a word. Bad as we are, we're not that bad. We are the creations of an almighty power and energy and love and the whole point of Christianity is that God, what we call God, took account of our inadequacy, our failure, and said, you're just what I wanted. You're the apple of my eye. And to have my friend Charlie say that unbidden and not even thinking of, I'm expressing a kind of profound faith here, just made it all the more delicious. But I find it happens a lot of times. What I call inadvertent Christians, people who live and believe and know on that foundation. And it's so much more fun in a way when you can share it with new friends, people who are becoming friends, strangers, and you can get that glimpse. You know what I'm talking about?
I think I know what you're talking about. If I could go back a little bit to the question around, religion changing, downsizing, resizing.
Yeah.
Christianity, none of these religions, although they like to claim, possession of some ultimate truth, they're all evolving. Christianity, it took 3 centuries before the Christian canon came to be. Before that, there were all kinds of stories circulating, but it took a while to get it, to claim it. You think about Zoroastrianism was once huge religion. It's now fizzled down to nothing. Christianity, in 50-something, broke into Orthodox and Catholic, and then Protestantism, and now think about, there's snake handlers, there's the silent Quakers, there's these huge numbers of ways of being Christian, that these religions are going to be evolving, adapting, adjusting. In our tradition, in the United Church of Christ, we like to say that, never place a period where God has placed a comma. God is still speaking. And the point of that is, God is still speaking, we must still be listening. That we do not claim that there was one ultimate truth once upon a time, and when the pages of the Bible closed and you had the back cover, that's it, God stopped speaking in there. But that God is still speaking now, and that we had better be listening. And it's about evolving of our thoughts as more people speak. I can say that when Old South Church was founded in 1669, the speakers that people listened to were all white men, right? Mm-hmm. And landowning white men. And we have learned over time to add more voices to be listening to, all those voices having been the creation of a gracious God, and God who apparently loves diversity, because look, if you go into a rainforest, that our theological project for us today is to hear God through hearing other voices, and that we will learn more about God in the endeavor to learn more about God's earth, God's world, and the people who inhabit it, who we don't know, their different kinds of life stories. So this is going to mean, in our tradition, evolution is something we actually cherish because we hope to be learning more about this gracious God who loves us despite who we are.
How do you manage that in the sense that people love many gods in a way, but they also love to improvise. Where's the authority, so to speak, in your church?
Yeah.
And who draws the lines?
Authority in our tradition is with the local congregation, with an educated clergy, and with authorization for clergy. We don't have bishops, we don't have a pope, we don't have a creed, and we are engaged with the biblical text. The authority comes from the congregation engaging in the text together and together discerning what it is that God is calling us. So, discernment is important for us, and that is done by engaging with the ancient text, engaging in prayer, listening to each other, bringing our heads, because we think God gave us heads with brains, as well as our hearts, as well as our souls to the task.
This is so interesting. And you and I, obviously, in very different ways, and you have real experience and knowledge, which I don't, but we just love the whole church idea. I used to love going to church every Sunday. And for 30 years, it was just a high point. And I would often come home and tell my kids and my wife, and it's true, I never have been to a baseball game or a basketball game or almost any kind of show that was as interesting as 3 hours on a Sunday morning at the 12th Baptist Church. You would hear guest preachers, you'd hear the children's choir, you'd hear the organist, you'd hear once a month there was this jazz ensemble, and ours was, Bradford Marsalis, when he was at Berkeley College, played on Sundays at the 12th Baptist Church. It was, Haynes would always say, he didn't like it when people say, well, now we had church, that was church. But it was deeper than entertaining. It was revealing. There would be testimonies, there would be all sorts of surprises.
So when those early followers of Jesus were following him, it was exciting. Things were popping. People were being healed. The authorities were being challenged. It was exciting. I think that if we can bring that excitement into our worship, that's a part of what we try to do too, probably in a little bit more constrained way. But it is exciting to be in the presence of the divine.
Amen.
Right?
Spirit of the living God,
That's right.
fall afresh on me. But okay, given our enthusiasm and the pleasure in it, how do you explain the decline of church-going and churches in our world? I'm also fixed on the fact that we used to hear any number of church voices. I always think of Father Hesburgh had an almost royal role in our culture. The president of Notre Dame, Roman Catholic priest, and he was an authority. He was Mr. Blue Ribbon Commission, but he spoke from a moral standpoint. William Sloane Coffin, the Yale chaplain in my time, now there was a totally different voice, but he was consulted and he spoke out on the Vietnam War and other things. Who in the world is playing that role today? I miss it terribly. But explain the decline, what we think of as the decline, and it's not just resizing, it's a diminishment of the voice of religious people, again, not ordering anybody around, but witnessing to their belief in the public square.
Well, Colin, you mentioned back in the room there about the internet, and people have so many sources, so many places to go that you don't have people gathering around single voices the same way as they used to. I also think the church has just lost its authority, but that's not all bad because that was bound in with the state.
Even when it was talking back, Martin Luther King Jr. in our lifetimes more than anybody, but testifying from Christian understanding and belief. I mean, what a gift that was.
That was a gift. And I think that what gave to Dr. King his uncommon courage was his faith in God, and that God was there with him no matter what, and would see, if not he, to the promised land, was going to be there cheering him on and cheering others on who would take up the baton after that.
But he was also made himself a figure of resistance not only in the Civil Rights Movement, but in the Vietnam War. Nobody spoke with more passion and clarity, and the words stand up with incredible power all these years later. But that was in resistance. He wasn't saying, I'm going to lead you, or...
He was despised when he died, when he was murdered. But most Americans, most white Americans, did not like that man at all. Part of the partly civil rights, but also war on poverty and his statements on the wars takes people a while to come round. But his theology was genuine. His gospel work, he stood on the gospel, and so that has stood the test of time.
I should have said, I mean, in the 12th Baptist connection, I mean, when he came to BU for his theological studies, his father said, you belong to 12th Baptist Church, and he and Michael Haynes both started as junior ministers in 1951, so he was definitely a member of the church family. He met Coretta through the secretary at the 12th Baptist Church. It was a very intimate connection and an unbelievable blessing. But, I mean, I hate to think that people are just spending time on social media and missing what you and I love about the church experience.
The church, people don't, the general public doesn't distinguish. It's like Christians are sort of one big thing, right? And I have to say that I think that the Catholic Church sexual abuse scandal was really hard on religion. It had a consequence to all of us, that people were not taking, that there was too much abuse and it was being hidden and it was being enabled, and that was a huge blow to Christians, not just Catholics. There's a lot of people come into our church. They don't know the difference between Protestants and Catholics. They don't know, they don't care, but they know that some leaders of the church made some terrible mistakes over a lot of years protecting abusers over children. I think that, I would like to think that, let me say something about why I think Protestantism is a hopeful future. There's some future to it, even if it is downsized. One is it's not patriarchal, which I, for one, find very important. Much of religion around the world is patriarchal in expression. And mainline Protestantism is one of the really strong expressions of a non-patriarchal church. It's not hierarchical. And, we could never have enabled quite such a pervasive scandal, really, I don't think, because we're separate entities. There isn't one thing or one body. So, speaking on behalf of the future of Protestantism, I think there's a future. I think there will be collections of people gathered here and there who come together and find support, meaning, succor, beauty, holiness in the collection, in the work of worship, and in the service that the church also offers to the world.
I'm especially aware, because I have family in Ireland, the sexual abuse scandals absolutely killed the church in Ireland. Probably the most Catholic society and powerful Catholic in every realm of government and society in the world. And it's over. It's like dead. And something's lost there, but I keep wondering, how in the world was it indulged? Was it abetted? Was it tolerated?
When all men are making a decision, there's no mother in the room ever, no women saying, come on. I just think that's a prescription for disaster. That's my position, being a slightly anti-patriarchal person in my life. I've had my share of interesting encounters with the church. I'm in the United Church of Christ because I grew up Episcopalian, baptized and confirmed in the Episcopal Church, and while I was at seminary, I tested ordination with the Episcopal Church, and I met with the Bishop of Long Island, who said, well, it's not going to happen under my watch. I don't ordain women but don't take it personally. So I found my way to the United Church of Christ. But I think that there is going to be an end to patriarchal religion. I think someday Catholicism will find a way to let women in leadership, or it will die. I think the fact that these men were, that they weren't infiltrated in their meetings with women and mothers, it was dire. They weren't hearing. They didn't understand the trauma, the horrors that this was inflicting upon people.
Well, that's the hard part to understand, because they knew they were doing something gravely wrong, and the Irish Catholic Church, in a special way, had this kind of abhorrence generally of sex and sexual understanding, sexual normalcy, sex as a sort of a vital part of human life. So they had to know almost doubly, triply, quadruply that this was way, way, way outrageously intolerable. But
what they may not have understood is the harm, the psychological harm such abuse for children would do down the line. I don't think they were talking to people. You know, I was the minister and president of Massachusetts Conference, the United Church of Christ, while Cardinal Law was here, so we were sort of opposites, not really. He had a lot more power than I did in his tradition. But he didn't talk with us about, you know, we all knew sexual abuse was happening. We all knew that this was issue. We all been instituting what we call safe church practices, where no child could ever be in trouble because no one adult was ever allowed with one child. We just don't permit it. We haven't permitted it for decades. Cardinal Law didn't go to meetings like that. He didn't talk with us about stuff like that. He didn't want to know. These things are preventable. You can make your church safe, so this will never happen to a child in your church. And Protestants have been doing this for decades.
really,
Absolutely. We have books called Safe Church Practices.
wow,
Oh.
interesting. I want to ask you a different question, Nancy, about the whole faith question and modernizing and sort of vernacularizing church experience, belief, faith, room for doubt, room for different expressions. To me, there's a real puzzle there. How far from the gospel and a decision to believe it or to accept it or to call it your faith, how far can you go without watering it down to almost nothing? I mean, to me, it's the question about Unitarians. And one of my kids is
There's some Unitarians in the room, just so you know.
That's fine, I'm all for Unitarians. But the sense, my father used to kid about it. He said, what do Unitarians believe? They believe in one God at the most. Or he would say, they believe in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, and the neighborhood of Boston. You've probably heard that one. But it's sort of like, just come and sing with us and hold hands. But to my, Orthodox childhood growing up, that's not quite enough. There's got to be Jesus, there's got to be life and death, there's got to be some notion of, not a scientific theory, but some notion of an intentional creation.
Here's what I would say, and I'm going to side with my Unitarian colleague over here on this one, is that...
I don't mean to offend anybody, especially Unitarians, but...
Is that God is so big, and our attempts at understanding God are so pathetic, that if I'm genuinely on a search for God, whether I go down that road called Buddhism, or that road called Unitarianism, or that road called Islam, or that road called Christianity, God is so big, I'm going to find God in one of those roads or another.
Yep.
That's how big God is. That's how pathetic or inadequate our understanding of God is.
Right.
No, I don't want to say pathetic, how inadequate.
No, that's good. There is a thing, and one of my kids put me up to it, sort of you answer 20 questions and we'll tell you what your religion is. And I did take it. I've completely forgotten what the questions were, but basically there was a general class of Unitarians and liberal Jews and Buddhists and liberated Catholics or whatever who kind of agree on how far they need to go or not go, which makes a lot of sense to me. At the same time, you want me as a consumer, so to speak, I want conviction in my church. I want some sort of clarity and affirmation that's not just, have a nice day.
I want conviction. Do we have conviction in our church? Oh, yes, we have conviction in our church. And we have conviction that this way of being Christian is meaningful and important and good and right for us, but not the only way.
Right.
It's not the conviction that we are right and you are wrong.
Right.
It's not the conviction that we alone have found our way to God. Hallelujah. Because every other Christian church is saying that.
Right.
We want to say, come on. The sense of orthodoxy of we've got it right also means
Right.
you've got it wrong. And we want to have conviction while saying, other people can that's just how big God is.
Right.
You're making God small if there's only a certain way. And I think the biblical witness is to a God who is elusive and does not want to be put in that box,
Yep.
in a creed, in a doctrine. Jesus was he broke out of the boxes, and so if he did, shouldn't his followers be breaking out of those boxes too?
Yeah.
I think one of the concerns I have about something like, we have the Mother Church here, Christian Scientist, is that Mary Baker Eddy was quite a revolutionary in her day, but her followers today have stuck back in that time. She was an innovator around health and healing, and now they don't do, they let, some of them don't do science. I think she would be you want people to be progressive in their thinking. And I feel that way about Jesus. He would, first of all, I think Jesus looks down and sees all these churches and goes, oh my gosh, what did I do? But also, I think of Jesus as really, really kind and forgiving and understands, how flawed we are. So, maybe it's okay that the Swedenborgians practice their faith in one way and the Unitarians in another and the Jews in another and the Muslims in another, and that God is big enough for all of us.
Yeah.
I sure hope so.
It reminds me of sort of another one of those lessons I associate with the Black Church, the Black Baptist Church. For me, a kind of liberated Orthodox catechism. I still remember my catechism, walking down the street. Who made me? God made me. Why did God make me? To know Him, love Him, serve Him in this world, and be happy with Him in the next. I mean, it was all there in 100 questions and answers or whatever. But in any event, there was a wonderful, and my man from, my brother from 12th Baptist will remember Sarah Small. Do you remember Sarah Small in church?
Aunt Sarah.
Say it again?
Aunt Sarah.
Aunt Sarah, praise Him. Praise Him. What a magnificent prayer lady and spirit from North Carolina. But anyway, one time we met sort of by chance. College chaplains were meeting at Harvard, and she wanted me to, no, don't be deceived by this Harvard thing. And I said, Sarah, what's the Harvard thing? She said, well, it's the whole idea. They think you can figure it out. You can master it in your mind. And you can't. And moreover, God loves your whole self. Your doubt, your middle of the night, your good days, your bad days, your mind, your body, your spirit. It's a complete embrace, and it is beyond rational understanding. You cannot analyze it to find the answer. But in that sense, the embrace of your whole self, that was a real revelation for me.
It's also, I think,
and thank you for remembering Aunt Sarah. What a magnificent person.
I think it's also an embrace of humility, which humans can use a lot of, is that, to posit God is to say, I, as a human, even if I, president of Harvard or whatever, am not, there's something more and that understands more, and I bring a certain humility to my life on earth. And I think humans could use a lot of humility all across the planet.
Yeah. I have one more general question, but then, I don't know, Colin, is this part of the rules that we...
We're going to open it up, yeah.
Sure. No, I was just thinking, I mean, where is the energy going that people would say has left the church? In other words, what I'm thinking in this whole Ukraine war and the history of weapons, war, nuclear weapons, which could destroy us. I mean, literally could destroy us in Ukraine, starting in Ukraine. But war as a god, war as a distraction, war as another solution. No, we won't talk about it. We'll just go to war. We'll bomb the bloody Jesus out of it. And there are many other obsessive fixations in our society. But I mean, you talk about humility, to pull us back from the lunatic excesses of this world we live in, this culture we live in.
Religion has gone to war a little too enthusiastically over the centuries, so I'm not sure the energy that's leaving the church is going into that. But,
okay,
but I would say, if you look back at early Boston in the 16 and 1700s, my forebears, the senior ministers of Old South Church in those days, they were rock stars. Everyone came to hear them preach. Now, where does everybody go? Fenway Park, or watch the Patriots. I mean, you asked where the energy went. Those are the stars today. Movies, music stars.
Yeah, interesting.
Left the church and gone there. And Fenway is considered Boston's great cathedral, and I can't tell you I don't love being there. I love being there. It's exciting to be there.
Yeah. Tom Brady gets a piece of he might be the Cardinal Archbishop. Yeah. Or was for a while. Please stand and shout.
Okay. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Nancy Taylor. Any doubt in your minds, having been here this evening, why Old South has flourished for 17 years? Wow, great to hear. And great to have Christopher Lydon with us in his own neighborhood, by the way. He just walked up from Chestnut Street to be with us. But we do want to give people a chance to ask questions. I'm all violating the first rule. You got to hold this close to you. And when you ask a question, we would say, please, no sermons, no homilies, no speeches, no eulogies, even your own. And Bern Stanfield is here. He's already been recognized more than once, and we're going to ask him to ask the first question.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you, congregation, for hosting this. And thank you, Chris and Nancy. I'm a big fan of both of them, so I'm really grateful for this conversation. And my question is about connection. I sort of feel like the Herbie Hancock theme should be cued right now. We should hear that again. But there is, along I-93 right now, a billboard, and it's advertising a recovery program. And it has the slogan that I've heard in many 12-step groups that says, the opposite of addiction is connection. Mm. And I know our title is Life and Faith, right? Future of Life and Faith. And I know in my own lived faith experience, connecting is really key, not only to the power beyond, but to human beings, flesh and blood. And so here's my question. We are tentatively emerging from a period, 2 years, of very intentional distancing, and arguably even more years of de facto distancing, you know. I'm curious, really from both of you, do you sense an appetite, an increased appetite for connecting, And however you answer that or think about that, what does that mean about the future of a faith, lived faith, mainline Protestant and otherwise? So my question is about connecting.
I guess I would start by saying that's what church is all about. And church is about being God's family, right? And being family to each other. And one of the marvels of it is in a place like Old South Church, where you are family. We are family by virtue of the waters of baptism. In the life of the church, water is thicker than blood. It makes us family. And what we have in a place like Old South Church, I'm sure a lot of your other churches, are people that might not otherwise be together. They don't live in the same neighborhood. And they don't necessarily have the same level of income as the people they normally would hang out with. That there's a cherished diversity in that kind of connection. They also, people don't necessarily live near their great grannies anymore. And in our church, we have great grannies for our little ones, and we have aunts and uncles for each other. And it's when we do baptisms, the congregation proclaims, we will create a nurturing, challenging Christian environment for this child, for this child belongs to us as well. This child is family to us. And the congregation vows to that family, we will be a part of your life so long as you allow us. And connection, I think people are definitely coming out and coming back and being ready. But I also want to say, Burns, we worked really hard through the, God bless the Zoom and other things. And I have a young staff who are very technologically savvy, who enabled us to be connected, gathered while dispersed, right? And understanding sacred space in a different way. And we're trying to still live into that now, as we have now regularly, we've picked up worshipers from all over the world. So now we're, every morning we're waving to them as well. And we have an online deacon saying, greet each other with peace. Those of you who are online and those in the room, greet each other with peace. So we're learning new ways of connecting, and it's both harder and more exciting and different that we're connecting both in the room. And I said last week, we're like God. We can overcome time and space in our worship now. People can worship with us whenever and wherever. So there's some good things about it.
Christopher Lydon, you've used that very word in your professional life, have you not?
Yeah, well,
Connection?
We had a radio program called The Connection, and it was a wonderful title. I got it out of a computer magazine. It was just desperate. We had to find a name for it. And anyway, there it was, The Connection. And it came from E.M. Forster. I'm blocking the name of the novel, but the inscription was "Only Connect." And I think people are desperate after 2 years of COVID for connection, for embrace, for a sort of mind, body, spirit recognition of each other, and acceptance. And it's really a deep, deep need. I don't know what more to say except that church is almost by definition, the perfect safe space with a larger community, but again, that holding hands and praying together, one-on-one, is such a deep connection and surrender. I think it's absolutely the core of what we want. And I gotta find it in church again. I gotta try out Old South, but to be with I don't know, everything's possible once you can relax in a sense of we're here together somehow as deep down equals, sinners saved by grace in this moment. Anyway, it's a wonderful connection, a wonderful connection you make.
Chris, you better get over to Old South fast. Nancy's last sermon is on, what, May 26th?
22nd.
22nd, yeah, so you got a little time to get over there. Those of us in the faith community, when we have a question about East Boston, we have learned to turn to David Searles, Assemblies of God Church, and he has our next question.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for hosting this and the opportunity to be here. My question is about the relationship between affluence and the practice and living out of faith. You mentioned that there are the flourishing of Christianity in other parts of the world, and there seems to be a decline here in the U.S. Would that there would be traffic jams on Sunday morning, right? So I wondered if you could comment on that, the impact of affluence. It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle.
There are studies that show that the more affluent a nation, the less religious, that religion is very helpful and useful for people who are in precarious financial circumstances. So I do think, yeah, I'm sure that plays into that. Scholars would say that plays into that.
Tracy Lithcutt works out of City Hall, but he has been a vibrant part of the faith community in Boston for the last few years, and he has a question, maybe coming out of City Hall.
No, not at all. I want to thank Colin for having me here today, and that's my guy. There's no way that I would miss this. I have a ton of questions, but one in particular. I grew up as a black Catholic, probably around the age of 11 or 12. It just was no involvement at all in the church anymore. My mother and father didn't make me go to church. Went away to college, came back. But then I started to, wanted to engage again. And a friend of mine, he was a vice president at the Berkeley School of Music. And then he started talking to me, and he wanted me to come to Bible study. I said, sure, I'd like to do that. I'd like to reconnect. But every time when I bring up these words to folks, it's like par for the course. I get the same response. Just curious, what do folks, when you talk about people working, I see this group working extremely hard to keep the church engaged in the community. But when you hear the term Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm just curious. Every time I speak to folks, and I was going to a one-on-one Bible study, any question that I had, this person would not answer the question. He would make me go to Scripture, which I really appreciated because I've heard so many folks that I felt were inaccurate in regards to what they were speaking of. I'm just curious, what do folks think of that group?
That's you, Nancy. I don't, not my experience.
I'll just say what I think of Tracy Lithcutt is I get more emails from him than anyone else on the planet. Hi, Tracy. Jehovah's Witnesses. Oh my gosh, I don't know that I've known Jehovah's Witnesses, particularly when I served a church in Idaho. I was in Idaho for 10 years, and I knew some Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know enough to say about it. It's a very particular conservative. Are there any Jehovah's Witnesses here? Odd tradition, I think.
It's not that odd considering if you follow devout practice, you wouldn't be allowed to enter a church that wasn't Jehovah's Witness.
Right. So that's why they're not here. You're saying. That's why I said there's nobody here. So I don't know. Look it up in Wikipedia.
This church is 200 years old, but we are in our infancy compared to the first church in Boston. 1630, is that right? And we have their representative here, not only from the first church on Marlborough Street, but also to defend the faith. He's a Unitarian Universalist.
Go Edmund.
Thank you. I've enjoyed being your toy, your rhetorical thing, and I love you both. Been listening to you for some time. My question, though, is I came here for the future of faith, and I wanted to think, what are the scientific things going on? Are we giving more power, godlike power, to humans through CRISPR, through genetic engineering, through things like that what's going to happen to faith? What's going to happen to belief in God if we have the power that traditionally has been God's? Can we engineer fate? So that was what I was looking for, but it just popped it to you. See what your reaction would be.
CRISPR and genetic modification scares the wits out of me for all sorts of reasons. But it actually brings up, to me, it is a very dangerous experiment. The idea of making genetic change that can be passed on to the next generations. And you say, well, if you could prevent tooth decay forever, you'd be tempted. But I think it's fundamentally blasphemous because it is playing God. And as James Watson, the biologist, said, of course we're playing God. And if we don't do it, who will? I really, to me, that sort of science is a false religion. And I think one of the places that religious faith has disappeared into or has been replaced by is that kind of arrogant science. Very briefly, and I've talked about this with a lot of people, including the practitioners in George Church, the famous, the chief at the Harvard Medical School. With great respect, he's a wonderful person. But the whole, people who sneer at the whole idea of intelligent design. Oh, come on, there's nobody directing this process. They will also say, oh, by the way, how would you like, I'll do it for you. I'll do intelligent redesign, as if they knew what they were doing. They have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea what the consequences are. And they have nothing remotely like humility about their place in the world. Anyway, I think it's one of the real false gods of our world, and I think the consequences could be horrific. So that's my short answer. I've done a lot of radio about it, and I worry about it. I don't think millions and millions of years of evolution, which can be dismissed as, it's just one accident after another. I think there must be respect for that. George, do people know George Church? He's a great, big, brilliant guy with a huge beard. He's the one who became very famous for wanting to restore the woolly mammoth from the frozen DNA and inject it into elephants and whatnot, and sooner or later you'll get a woolly mammoth. He's a marvelous man, and he's surrounded by other brilliant scientists. But I asked him, do you worry about Murphy's Law? That what can go wrong will go wrong. He said, I worry about it every day. I don't think he's the problem, but the whole idea of tampering with God or no God, but millions of years of nature, to my mind, that's God at work. To say, no, I'm going to do something, a little tweak here that will improve the whole situation. I don't buy it at all.
Nancy, can you improve on that?
No, I guess I would just add that there's always going to be a space for ethicists on this planet. They're not paid well. They're not paid well like Tom Brady. They should be. I think we need ethicists, and because there's always going to be people testing the limits of what it is that the human mind and science and can do. So I think we should start developing teams of ethicists and think of them as superstars.
Thank you. One of the really solid religious voices in Boston that we've learned to count on is Mark Scott from the Azusa Christian Community, 411 Washington Street in Dorchester. And it's so good to have you here, Mark. You got a question?
This is sort of building on the question that my Unitarian Universalist brother asked about the future, life, faith. And so faith must be tested. And I'm wondering, Professor Lydon, if you have any insight from the arts, from literature, that will help. We've been through such a time of testing with and also, Pastor, from the framework of faith, from the church, we've been through such a period of testing. 2 years in the pandemic, the technical power to tamper with life. I'm reading an article on my way over here, just before coming, about that we could stumble into a nuclear war this year. Something that we thought perhaps was unthinkable a year ago is now right in front of us, right? And so, how do you keep the faith? Anything that would help us while our faith is so tested in this time.
I want to go back to our forebears who were tested before us, and who, I think the story of Exodus and the 40 years wandering in the wilderness, and I think of, was not Dr. King tested? Oh my gosh, right? And that in being in community and in company with those who came before us who were tested, and whose lives were hellish, that at least gives us, the company. We're not alone. I guess that's how I see it.
Someone's memory of one of my kids coming with me to 12 Baptist Church, but she picked up the line, if the Lord leads you to it, he'll lead you through it. I summon that faith or notion, in times when I'm feeling very, very doubtful, sort of like, stick with it. You can believe, you can trust, and mostly it works. One more Haynes-ism. His Bible verse that he chose as a boy, but remained his throughout his life, is from Proverbs, I think, but it's trust the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not on thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy path. That is sort of an abandonment to God's will, which you pray will make itself clear to you. But the point was only, I've heard Haynes quote that 50 times, easily. And he would always say at the end, lean not on thine understanding, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy path. And it works. I mean, that sort of pragmatic, do it, it'll work. And I know he believed it devoutly, and I'm sure he practiced it. I'm in a tricky situation here. I don't know the way out, right, left. Trust the Lord with all thine heart. It's not just about you, Chris, or Michael Haynes, or you, Mark. It's just, let it happen, let it unfold. Does that even speak to your question? And I'm not saying as one who's been terribly tested either. It means people who are really tested, it's another different story, and I can testify to that.
William Dickerson from Greater Love Tabernacle is one of our great preachers here in Boston. Wonderful human being. His son is here tonight, and what his son doesn't know is that he has something in common with Christopher Lydon. Young Dickerson ran for office and was soundly defeated. How many remember when young Lydon ran for mayor and was soundly defeated? You got a question.
Come on, 3.5% of the population can't be all wrong, Colin. That's all I
always tell people, I said, there's one thing that you do, you get it out the way, then you figure it out if you're going to do it the next time. Yes, at some point in your life. But you don't do it without the blessing of your family. And I wouldn't have done it without my son. My son said, go do it. He said, you might, be older one day and regret it, you know, so do it. So I said, okay, let's go. But Reverend Taylor, I enjoyed you. You brought up a point in regards to the fact that many might look around and say, is the church gone? You know, 2 years of the pandemic, watching things remotely, watching service remotely, not being in worship together, and people get comfortable with that, you know. And I take it a step further, you know. I appreciate everyone in this room, the generation before me, because I consider that the praying generation, you know. Since I was a young boy, going to prayer meetings and prayer services and going to church. Basically, I believe I went to church 7 days a week. You know, growing up in that, I think my generation it's like more of like the instant generation. You want everything fast. So, you know, if you get baptized this day, 2 days later you want to open your church, you know. It's like, slow down, you know. So I appreciate your generation of teaching and praying. But my question is, do you think it will ever be a time that we can get everyone together, no matter denomination, church affiliation, religious affiliation, get everyone to basically, if you look at, you know, you point out the Catholic Church. I went to a Catholic high school, even though my family we weren't Catholic. This a day of, you want to say a day of atonement, to stand together in solidarity, to tell others that may not know anything, you know, we apologize. We're sorry. We're sorry for this, for that, you know, whether it's sexism in the church for years, saying, you know, women are not allowed to do this, women aren't allowed to do that, whether it's racism, or whether it's just different other issues, standing collectively, saying that we're sorry, and through that, I think a lot of healing to come from that. And I just want you to just explain, if you can, how can we, as the next generation, as we grab that baton, how can we run with that message, and how can we be the ones to bring everyone together, to send that message out?
Thank you. I mean, I think confession and atonement are fundamental to the life of a Christian and to the life of a Christian community. I can speak on behalf of Old South Church that we've been, you know, we're in the process of confessing and atoning for a racist past, for our, I think, 4 of our first 7 ministers enslaved others. And we've been researching our members from the 16 and 1700s of African descent, most of them enslaved, and we now have their names in a memorial tree at our church. We've done some public things like that, just our church, to our own members, you know, but that is a part of the rhythm of the Christian life, right? Is confession, is naming the truth, confessing it, and atoning for it, trying to repair. Can we all come together? I don't know. I know that a lot of old white churches like ours are trying to do some of that work. We're working at it. And as I've said, you know, when you're 352 years old, you have much to atone for. Yeah, it's important. It's and I would just say it's a part of the rhythm of our life as a Christian church.
Did you want to add, Chris?
Not really.
Okay, thank you.
Nancy speaks for me.
Pat Blakeney is a member of the Board of Trustees here at our church. She has a question.
Well, I was going to respond to a couple of questions that were asked. I know Tracy mentioned the Jehovah's Witnesses and that drop, but Reverend Taylor had answered it earlier when she said God is big. Everybody has their own road to God, and you know that's how that should be addressed, I think. Okay. And also the question about faith being tested. You know, God is the same God that he has always been. You know, he hasn't changed. It's up to us to be tested and increase our faith so that when these things happen, like these threats of nuclear war and all this, you know, that's going to be a test of our faith in God. And he has not changed. We need to change. It's us. We need to grow, be tested, and grow. And that's what it's all about. That's all I wanted to do, respond to that.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
He has not changed, but some have called him Chi in the modern generation. So we're good. We're going to give the last question to my co-pastor, Kevin Baxter, and we'll get a Swedenborgian perspective here.
I have to do some selfish, shameless self-promotion, I guess. But one of the things, of the list of things that you can probably count on one hand that Swedenborgians have done that people might have actually ever heard of. And most people don't know this is something that the Swedenborgians did, but a small group of people in Chicago in the 1880s got together and came up with a little idea to run concurrent with the World Fair, which is called the World Parliament of Religions.
The World
Parliament of Religions.
Yes.
It was the brainchild of a particular group at a Swedenborgian church in Chicago, and the keynote speaker was a man named Charles Carroll Bonney, who wrote a keynote speech called With Absolute Respect. It was their belief that bringing the world's religions together, where we could respect another person's belief, celebrate the differences, and also see the good that they're doing, would usher in world peace. The next World's Fair came about after an incredible exhibition of religion and faith, and religion was discounted. There's been a huge push since then by people to do interfaith, inter-Christian sorts of things. It seems to me as if, you mentioned the world contracting. Many faiths, many traditions, as the world contract, are getting more protective of their boundaries. And the clergy breakfasts, which this church at one point was known for, the interfaith work, with people getting tired, with people being, scared of maybe member attrition, it seems like all of that's gone away. If you could maybe think of something the church could do to live into a vision where we could have strength in our faith and celebrate the difference of others. What is maybe a practical thing that the church could do to maybe help in this divisive world?
Join GBIO.
Do they still meet?
Oh, join the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, where we all come together. We each speak our own faith, respect each other, and do good work together, right? Right, Burns? GBIO.
It sounds, Kevin, as if there's something of a parliament of religions right here. I also want to say, I want to know more about this, but I don't know about Swedenborgians except that the father of William and Henry James, two of the greatest minds that this country ever produced, was a Swedenborgian. And I still don't know what it means.
Well, I'm not leaving on the 22nd, so you can come by.
We need to wind down here, and I want to recognize the people who are on the internet and with us tonight. We love you very much. We're particularly grateful to those of you who came out tonight. We still think of the church as the gathered community, and you all have gathered, and you have done something wonderful in our eyes by coming out tonight and being with us. Some of you are masking, some of you are not. You're all blessed. We thank you very much for being here. I want to remind Chris Lydon that his main plank when he ran for mayor was the public school system.
Amen.
Amen, right?
Yeah.
And we wish he would run again. I mean, and maybe he will. Who knows? He seems to have a lot of energy. But we did want to say tonight, Nancy Taylor is retiring, and there's going to be a lot of celebration of her 40 years in ministry. And we've got just a glimpse of the quality of her ministry tonight. Amen? Haven't we seen that in just the way she speaks? Just a wonderful thing. But we wanted to get in on this. I mean, we wanted to be part of this celebration, and so we brought some flowers along. And we're going to give them to Nancy. And please, come on. She's been Let me say this also about Nancy. She's been a great success at Old South. She has been a wonderful colleague, and ministers all over the city have turned to her again and again and again. Look at the diversity just in this room. It's not a packed house tonight, but we've got people from a lot of different parts of this city, and we're glad to have you here. Now, Christopher Lydon is not retiring, and he's going to be back here on April 7th with Andrea Campbell to talk about what we were terming the new Massachusetts. How new is it, right? Yeah. How are we going to think about what this state that looks so different all of a sudden? What is the meaning of that? And we hope you'll make a point of coming back and bringing a friend. So we do have some refreshments in the back, some light refreshments. I don't know if these folks will sign your bulletin or not, but we'd like to continue the conversation, and we're very, very grateful to you for coming out, and grateful for all of you for tuning in from Francistown, New Hampshire, from New Jersey, from all kinds of places around the United States. We're delighted to have you here. By the way, they can't tell where we are located. And we say we're right next to the State House. People say, what does that mean, you're right next to the State House? We say, we're right next to the State House, okay? We could take a paper airplane and sail it right out the door onto the governor's desk, couldn't we? Right here. So this is where we are. Whether you're up there or down here, we're glad to have you here. Please come back. God bless you as you go. Thank you, Nancy Taylor. Thank you very much. And Christopher Lydon, thank you.
Pleasure.
Good night, everybody.